So the questions we're here tonight to talk about include, should we follow the example of Ned Ludd, the legendary weaver who broke the machines in Nottingham, how we get Luddite, or the more recent phone-free childhood campaigners ignited by Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation? Or should we fully embrace the accelerationistas, the technological optimists whose mantra seems to be to save the world, click here? So the key challenge in the coming years in our virtual and physical environments, they may be AI rich, but the question is, will they, or how will they enrich our lives? How to spot the difference between effective technology use and potentially dangerous technology use. What role for private citizens and governments to take action? And this is the panel we have here to help us lead through the discussion to answer some of these questions and more tonight.
So Andrew, you've just moderated the Shaping AI for the Next Generation panel discussion at Reuben College, Oxford. What did you think of the event?
Oh, it was an incredible discussion. I think it blended technology enthusiasm, concern for the human person, international relations, the future of education. So there's almost no area of discussion that this work on AI and the next generation doesn't touch. And so I think that makes it such a wide-ranging and amazing entry point for anyone. And it was just an incredibly enriching discussion.
There is one thing I'd like to add, which I think to any of the teachers and academics in this audience, is that there's one missing link in society. And the missing link in society, or the missing link in education, is one of critical thinking, which in my opinion is the ability to ask the right question. If you can't ask the right question, then what we're discussing is nascent. It just doesn't function. But critical thought is equally important, is the ability to interpret the answer coming back to you. Can I give a brief example? I'm probably the oldest person in the room, but when I went to school, I learned arithmetic. I learned to add, subtract, multiply, divide. I wasn't great, but I was competent. When I left school and I went to work, started to work in retail, I was given a calculator. And a calculator made me 10 times faster. But did I trust the calculator? No. I was doing the mental arithmetic in my mind to make sure that the numbers on my calculator were correct. So I just multiplied my capability. I think that paradigm shift is where we are today. It's not a substitute for education. It's not a substitute for knowledge. You still have to have a blended approach where you're being taught, where you're learning things, but you have the ability to sense check and then maybe escalate your learning. Yeah. So I believe in that particular philosophy.
No, I love that. Even thinking about something like writing, where you can focus on the product, the end product, the essay or whatever it is, but there's a different way of approaching writing, which is thinking. Writing is thinking, writing Absolutely. Is learning, and it's about the process of doing it, which is as valuable as the end product.
But then you're challenged with the fact there are people in the room who will say that assessment is critical. I think assessment is broken. I think we need new methodologies of assessment that lean into the new environments that we're moving into.
I think I took up too much of people's time. No, it was an amazing panel. I mean, you brought together a group of people who were complementary on one level and challenging on another. And I thoroughly enjoyed not just the conversation of the panel, but also the interaction with the audience. Super impressed, very grateful to be invited, and happy to contribute and help at any time.
We want a country where we are raising citizens who can ask questions about public funding. Should we be spending all this money on autonomous vehicles, or should we be putting it into public transport, right? Or we're talking about the trust coefficient. There's some really interesting work that's going on in various different local councils around kind of direct participation. And so how can we use technologies to enable that more than we currently do. So I think for me, that critical thinking piece is so crucial, and also sort of being able to help young people and indeed all our audiences understand, what are some of the trends around mis and disinformation in the media ecosystem. So you might think that you just see an image of the Pope in the puffer jacket and everyone assumes that is in fact a real thing that has happened, when actually disinformation, you have sort of whole bot armies that elevate particular pieces of information that are trending online. And so if you're a young person, or indeed anyone, how can you assess whether or not a particular piece of content is true, but even the discourse around that content, is that something that I'm seeing because of my political affiliation or ethnicity or whatever it might be. So I guess that's a lot to say that there is, we see that, and we think it's absolutely a critical part of sort of any education that we might be doing around AI, that we have citizens who are able to make informed choices.
I mean, I will say that this is probably one of the first panels I've come to where I've just been more excited to hear from everybody else on the panel and hear their thoughts. It was an incredibly intimate conversation, actually, and I think we were really in dialogue with each other about all of these different tensions, from innovation to protecting and safeguarding children to how that changes if you're in the UK or in China or elsewhere. So honestly, it was a really fantastic experience, and I feel like I've learned a lot from being there.
So it's early days. So far, it actually has been language woven into a number of the kind of application-specific AI regulations. And so broad language of needing to protect these groups of people. But that will then give the kind of remit for different actors to go and add specificity later. And it's going to be a learning process for everybody. And I wouldn't say that they have all of these things figured out yet.
Can I add
something
please,
to that? Let's,
Sorry.
I think we now are in the part of the discussion where please jump in.
It's super interesting because I also think there is a question around, when we think about innovation, we assume it's just innovation from big tech and that the big tech model of innovation is the only way we can innovate. And that isn't true, right? So if you're thinking about social media, which is sort of functionally an advertising platform, what if there were to be other kinds of social media that weren't sort of founded on the basis of just driving ad revenue, but it was actually about sort of, fruitful public discourse or whatever it might be. So I think that's also the thing too, right? We may need to regulate in order to create that level playing field. But equally, we could imagine new types of innovation that are actually just primarily beneficial to society rather than to shareholders.
It's great, extremely lively. I really thought it was so important that we hit a number of times on the role that we need children to play very actively in shaping the future that we have with and using AI, and also using both them and our own ideas to think about the world that we want to see and make sure that that becomes the reality rather than some other kind of sense of an inevitable version of the world we'll live in with this new, really immensely transformative technology.
I think it's really important to understand, how current ways of using this technology impacts their cognitive development, their social skills, their emotional regulation skills. So once we know, and that's why we need to do this research, and hopefully we'll have something to share, but once we know, then we're able to have an action plan and address that.
Maybe Antonia first then.
Very quickly add to that, I couldn't agree more. There is a huge lack of evidence in research, especially how, we are talking about how actually AI use, data use impacts children. We are currently at the Digital Futures for Children Center looking at different AI EdTech tools and how they impact children's rights. And the lack of evidence out there about especially the well-being aspects or like different rights is huge, both about benefits and the risks we have evidence, but also so there is need for more research.
It was a fantastic discussion. Such a great multi-stakeholder and interdisciplinary approach that we had, and also bringing innovation approaches to regulation and child rights-based approach with a lot of optimism and recognizing that actually AI has huge opportunity and what good looks like. So it was amazing, an incredible discussion. Thank you.